Hey, today we're going to do a video about secret military tunnels. So, one of the things I find fascinating is that in all the reporting from places like ISW, Live View AMAP, wherever else, there's hardly any mention of the underground component, okay? And it's really interesting because in the war in Ukraine, there's drones that create a 10 kilometer on either side, so 20-kilometer wide kill zone on either side where drones are monitoring and destroying any vehicles coming into the battle line. This obviously makes fighting really difficult, and it makes it almost impossible to move supplies. And both sides talk about, especially with now the fiber optic drones and whatever other innovations are coming, it's extremely hard to move supplies on the battlefield of Ukraine. And what I noticed just from watching the war in Ukraine is that the battle line always seems to move whenever a mine is captured, right? So clearly, it's very obvious there are a lot of secret tunnels. And in fact, there's an article right here talking about the secret underground cities that Ukraine has. And I just wanted to explore that with you guys to sort of take a look into something that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about in the war in Ukraine. So first of all, let's start off with Vuhledar. Okay, so Vuhledar used to be right here. This used to be the rightmost bottom right corner, the defensive flank of Ukraine in the war. And what happened is, quite a few months ago now, it fell, and it was a huge tragedy. And as you can see, the Russians were able to roll up like 50 kilometers deep into Ukraine after this happened. So, people often talk about the above ground components. They talk about how what happened in Vuhledar is that the Russians came across the river, the Russians got the Ukrainians off axes, there are all these sorts of problems. But I posit actually that what really happened is that the Russians got into the Ukrainian coal mines, because Vuhledar has a number of coal mines, deep shafts underground that go, super far, kilometers in either direction. And it's such an easy way where you can have numerous resupply points that go outside of the range of drones, because they can actually extend these tunnels, right? They have all the mining equipment in the tunnels. They can extend these tunnels so that supplies can come in and out of Vuhledar without any sort of need to get exposed to drone fire, get exposed to artillery fire, for the enemy to even see what you're doing. So if we actually look at the Battle of Vuhledar, we can see that part of the renewed offensive efforts, which led to the capture of Vuhledar, was to seize positions around coal mine number 1, northeast of Vuhledar. And afterwards, you can see the Ukrainians get captured, and they get surrounded. And this is really interesting because there's a lot of talk in this article here about how they're surrounded and this, that, and whatever. But the fact is that it would not be possible to surround Vuhledar, assuming that they've been extensively mining their tunnels outwards to build resupply shafts. It would not be possible for an overland encirclement to defeat them. There would have to be an underground encirclement. So I think that what actually happened in Vuhledar is that when the Russians got into coal mine number 1, that they were able to, either prior to seizing the coal mine number 1 above ground or afterwards, they were able to get into the coal mine shafts, and they were able to make them unusable to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians were no longer able to use the shafts to resupply, because Vuhledar fell not so long after the coal mines fell. And you can actually see the coal mines are sort of marked here northeast of the town. So that's really interesting, right? Because you often hear about the drones, this, that, whatever, but you don't hear about the underground warehouses that allow both sides to continue the war. And now the Russians have this, right? So the Russians can use Vuhledar as a resupply point, and there's probably a whole bunch of tunnel entrances all around. They can peek out wherever, and you don't know where they're going. Okay, so Vuhledar, that was example number 1. Example number 2 is Bilorivka. So Bilorivka has been held in the northeast, this chalk mine right here, for a very long time, and it only recently fell like a month or 2 ago. And what's really interesting about this is that a chalk mine obviously is very easy to mine. So if you already have a chalk mine there, you can mine into the chalk. It's very easy. It's like chalk, right? So it's very easy to pick away at it and to build tunnels. And there's actually a video of a reporter going into these positions because they defended it for so long, and they had like these deep underground chalk sort of caverns, wood lined, that the Ukrainians would go in, and this is what they would use to resupply. Even when they were surrounded on three sides, they would resupply, and they would use, they would use drones, they would use artillery, they would spot and to kill the Russians. And the Russians actually, I don't believe they were ever able to get on top of this hill until they captured everything else. And one thing that you have to imagine is that how would the Russians be able to defeat an enemy who's hiding inside a box with drones and artillery that they can call, who maybe you have the above ground, but how are you supposed to resupply yourselves? And they can resupply themselves endlessly, right? That's a losing battle, no matter how many more soldiers you have. So it must have been the case that the Russians were able to dig through the chalk once they got forward enough and actually mine into the Ukrainian tunnel system. That's just common sense to me. No one talks about this. I think this is secretive, so I just want to open your mind here to the secret life of tunnels. Okay, so the next up is Bakhmut. So Bakhmut obviously was this really, really big fight that they had going on. It was the big story for quite a while. And what's really interesting about Bakhmut is that it has deep underground caverns. It has very, very deep underground caverns. It has the Artemzl Shalt mine located in Solidar, and there's connections that go back and forth. And there's talk of, like, during the Holocaust, when the Germans were there, that the Jews were, like, massacred in some tunnel. There's, like, very, very deep tunnels underneath the city. So when they talk about Bakhmut being captured, actually a big part of, like, capturing it is, like, the tunnel network. So that's also very interesting, that all these sort of frontline cities that stay on the front line, it's not just that they're on the front line, it's that there's significant tunnel networks defending them. So the last one I'll talk about here is Pokrovsk. So Pokrovsk is currently, being surrounded and attacked, and you might wonder, how are they able to resupply the city with these drones? Because, the urban warfare thing, okay, sure, it's hard to attack into a city, but if you can get all the drones to destroy all the resupply, then there's no possible way they could be able to fight. Well, the reason Pokrovsk is so important is because you have here this Pokrovsk coal mine that just had to close relatively recently as the Russians advanced. So you can see that the mine is located southeast in Donetsk. It represents one of the largest coal reserves in Ukraine, huge reserves, large amount of shafts, and this is obviously where they're fighting. So they're fighting in this area. So that's just really fascinating, right? That all of the stuff that you hear about the above ground war, that's not the entire story. There's underground battles happening. There's people digging tunnels. There's people digging counter tunnels. There's resupply happening. And this is how the whole front line goes. You can actually imagine that there must be really deep tunnel networks. I don't know how deep they go, but is it out of the question that a tunnel could cross all the way from, like, Zaporizhia all the way over to the east here? Is that out of the question? Because they've had quite a long time in this war. They have a lot of mining experience. They have a lot of mining expertise. And a lot of their mines were actually captured, which means that those people are out of work and they need something to do. So it would make sense if there was a lot of tunnel digging going on, because it's pretty cheap and easy to dig a tunnel very quickly. So much of this line, you can imagine, must be crisscrossed with tunnels. And you imagine that there might be counter tunneling going on, because back in the Kursk offensive, Sutsa was actually seized by some sort of tunnel shenanigans. So you can only imagine what goes on in these bigger cities, because that's quite a small town. So yeah, I just wanted to alert you that you wonder, how are we supposed to fight in the age of drones? Well, a big solution that is not talked about and is very commonly practiced is tunnels. So the secret life of tunnels. There you go.